The martial arts gym was unusually tense that Thursday evening. Most nights, the janitor, James Washington, quietly entered after hours, mopping the mats and emptying bins once the students had already gone home. But tonight was different. The advanced class had run longer than expected, and the janitor found himself face to face with an audience. From the center of the mat stood Derek Mitchell, a black belt who relished attention as much as he did authority. His belt glistened beneath the bright fluorescent lights as he called out mockingly, "Hey, you with the mop, how about giving us a little demonstration?" His voice carried across the gym, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life, right?" James paused mid-motion, his mop resting against the bucket. Slowly, he lifted his head. At 42, he carried the quiet demeanor of a man content with anonymity. For the past 3 weeks, he had been cleaning that gym, blending into the background, always careful to avoid unnecessary attention. "I don't want to interrupt your lesson, Sensei," he replied evenly, his tone polite yet firm. "Just finishing my work so you can continue." Derek laughed, a loud, exaggerated laugh designed to entertain his students more than himself. The sound echoed off the walls, bouncing with arrogance. "Look at this, everyone." He's scared to even step on the mat. Around him, 8 students chuckled nervously. Some laughed to fit in, others shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with the cruelty disguised as humor. What Derek failed to realize was that the man in front of him was not simply a janitor. For the past 20 years, James had been running from an identity he never wanted anyone to know about. He wasn't just a man with a mop, he was a man with a history. 2 decades earlier, James "Silent Storm" Washington had been one of the most feared names in mixed martial arts. A 5-time world champion, unbeaten, respected, and dreaded in equal measure. But his career ended abruptly after a tragic sparring accident, an accident that haunted him every single day. He had promised himself never to fight again, never to unleash the storm that lived inside him. Not even his teenage daughter knew the full truth. But arrogance has a way of poking wounds best left untouched. "Come on," Derek insisted, stepping closer with that smug grin he used to intimidate fresh beginners. "Just a small demonstration. My students need to see the difference between a man who trains and a man who cleans." Something stirred deep inside James' chest. It was like a long dormant instinct waking up. His eyes locked with Derek's, and for the briefest of moments, the black belt faltered, taking an involuntary step back without knowing why. There was something unsettling about the calm in James' gaze. Still, Derek refused to back down. "Nothing too serious, just to prove a point," he pressed, trying to mask his hesitation. "A quick example so they understand why respect matters in martial arts." James placed the bucket down with deliberate slowness and straightened to his full height. Every movement carried a strange fluidity, the kind that didn't belong to someone untrained. The 8 students noticed immediately. Silence spread across the gym like a chill wind as they realized something was unfolding that was far more serious than a joke. "All right," James finally said, his voice steady, calm, like the still water before a storm breaks. "But when we're finished, you'll apologize. To your students," to her, he nodded towards Sarah, the young Asian student who had tried earlier to de-escalate, "and to yourself, for turning this mat into a circus." Derek forced another laugh, but the cracks in his bravado were starting to show. "Apologize? No, you'll be the one apologizing to the floor when you meet it." None of the students knew what James carried inside him. None of them realized that standing before them was not just a janitor, but a legend, a man who had retired undefeated, a man known across the world as Silent Storm. He had once filled arenas, silenced critics, and humbled champions. But he had also walked away at the peak of his career after one mistake, one night, one friend lost forever. And now, because of one arrogant instructor, the storm was beginning to return. Derek adjusted his belt with a theatrical tug, savoring the attention. "Everyone, gather around. Tonight you'll see why there's a hierarchy in martial arts." His voice dripped with arrogance. "Why some people belong on the mats and others should stick to mops." The students obeyed, forming a semicircle. Some looked eager, others uneasy. Sarah, her hair tied neatly back, whispered to her partner, "This doesn't feel right." Her partner only shook his head, unwilling to speak out. James stood quietly, but his mind was elsewhere. The insults echoed in his head, blending with ghosts from 2 decades earlier. He remembered the night in Las Vegas, the championship fight against Victor, the demolition man Petrov. The crowd's jeers had been filled with venom. Look at him, a black man in the cage? He won't last 3 rounds. James had silenced them with a TKO in the second round. But it was the sparring session afterward, the careless, rage-fueled punches that had cost him his best friend Tony Rodriguez. One mistake, one fall, and Tony never opened his eyes again. He had carried that weight ever since. Now, in this small gym, the echoes returned. "Come on, Janitor," Derek sneered, circling him. "Show us your guard. Or is that too complicated for a man with a mop?" Laughter rang out, but it was thin, nervous. James didn't move. He closed his eyes, centering himself, feeling that long-buried instinct stirring again. "What's the matter? Scared?" Derek taunted, circling like a predator. "Or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost?" Then came Derek's mistake. He pushed James lightly on the shoulder, a casual shove meant to humiliate. But the moment his hand touched James, the gym shifted. James didn't budge. His body was immovable, his stance rooted like an oak tree. Derek felt it instantly. He hadn't pushed a man, he had pushed a wall. The smile slipped from Derek's face. For the first time, uncertainty crept in. "Interesting," James murmured softly, almost to himself. "It's been a while since someone tried to provoke me like that." His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that made predators hesitate before striking. Derek, blind to the warning, doubled down. "Did you hear that, everyone? He thinks this is interesting," he gestured mockingly. "Let's show him the difference between thinking and knowing." But what Derek didn't understand was that every insult, every shove, was peeling away the layers James had built over 20 years. He wasn't awakening rage, he was awakening the silent storm. Sarah watched with growing unease. Something about James' breathing, the subtle tension in his muscles, reminded her of the documentaries she studied for her sports psychology program. The calm before the predator strikes. She knew what was about to happen was no ordinary spar. Derek sneered one last time. "Last chance, buddy. Either step up or I'll call security. And when they escort you out, guess what? You lose your job too." James' eyes opened slowly. The moment his gaze met Derek's, the black belt felt it, that unexplainable chill racing down his spine. His body's instincts screamed at him, warning of danger, even as his pride refused to listen. "All right," James said finally, his voice low but resonant. "But when this is over, you're going to explain to your students why their sensei turned a place of learning into a circus." The room fell into absolute silence. The janitor was no longer just a janitor. Something far more dangerous, far more controlled, was standing on that mat. And for the first time, Derek Mitchell, the arrogant black belt, realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. Every strike he had perfected, every championship he had conquered, every lesson learned in the harshest rings of the world seemed to awaken in that moment. And when James finally lifted his eyes, Derek was no longer staring at a janitor with a mop. He was standing before Silent Storm Washington, the legendary 5-time World MMA champion. "Last chance," James said in a voice so calm it carried more weight than a shout. "Apologize to her. Apologize to your students. And restore this mat to what it was meant to be, a place of learning, not humiliation." Derek forced out a laugh, but it came out thin and shaky. "Apologize? You'll be the one begging for forgiveness when you're flat on the floor." What Derek didn't realize was that James had already broken him down in silence. He had noticed the sloppy guard that left his body wide open, the predictable retreat always to the right leg, the slight twitch in his shoulder that gave away every punch. 22 years outside the ring hadn't erased 2 decades of technical mastery. It had only sharpened James' ability to read people instantly. The students began to step back without even thinking, like prey animals sensing a storm before it strikes. Sarah felt it first, the sudden shift in the atmosphere, like static electricity just before lightning cracks the sky. When Derek tried another taunt to draw laughter, James didn't flare with anger. Instead, a different expression settled on his face. Not rage, not revenge, but the chilling resolve of a man who had finally found a cause worth breaking his 2-decade vow of silence. Some of the students began to realize, even without fully understanding, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Derek slid into his favorite stance, the one he had recycled for years to intimidate nervous beginners. Fists tucked in, shoulders tense, weight pitched forward. To his eyes, it looked professional. To James, it was an open book. He watched quietly, scanning Derek head to toe, the crooked guard, the shaky balance, the wasted energy, the tension that screamed out every move before it started. Still hopping lightly, Derek sneered. "Well, or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost?" That's when James finally moved. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic. Just a subtle lowering of his center of gravity, a shift of his feet, his shoulders settling into perfect balance. But to anyone with trained eyes, the transformation was terrifying. In that instant, the janitor had vanished, and in his place stood a predator. Sarah's breath caught. She had spent years studying biomechanics, watching hours of footage of history's greatest fighters. She knew exactly what she was witnessing, the shift from man to warrior, from dormant skill to lethal precision. For the first time, Derek's bravado faltered. "Interesting," he muttered, though his voice betrayed unease. James took a single step forward, and Derek instinctively stepped back before he realized it. The students noticed. A black belt backing away from a janitor, the balance of power had shifted completely. "Problem?" James asked softly, his voice cutting the air like steel. Derek flushed, his pride screaming at him not to retreat. "No problem," he forced out, flashing a brutal smile. "Nice stance. What, you learned that off YouTube?" The joke fell dead. Not a single laugh. The room was suffocating with tension. "Actually," James replied evenly, "I learned it in Las Vegas, the National Gymnasium. You may have heard of it." The name clicked for Sarah instantly. She pulled out her phone and searched. What she found made her heart stop. This wasn't some random training center. It was where the greatest MMA champions of the past 30 years had been forged. "Derek," James continued, his voice steady, "last chance. Apologize to Sarah for silencing her. Apologize to your students for turning their training into a circus. And most of all, apologize to yourself for becoming the kind of man martial arts was meant to protect people from." The offer of mercy lingered. Derek could have chosen humility. He could have walked away with dignity. Instead, he attacked. The first punch was textbook, fast, sharp, aimed straight at James' head. Against 99% of opponents, it would have landed clean. But James wasn't in that 99%. He flowed sideways like water, Derek's fist slicing nothing but air. Derek stumbled, already off balance. "Nice jab," James murmured, "perfectly stable. But you gave it away with your shoulder." Confused, Derek launched again, jab, straight hook, his signature combo. The crowd expected impact. Instead, they saw the impossible. James ducked under the jab by inches, leaned back to let the straight sail over him, and slid away from the hook with surgical precision. "Good sequence," James said lightly, "but you left your left side wide open." Sweat beaded on Derek's forehead. How could every strike miss? He barked, "Stop dancing and fight," and lunged with a flurry of punches and kicks. But each one sliced through empty space. And then, suddenly, James was standing closer. Too close, inside Derek's reach. "Want to know the difference?" James asked quietly, his palm rising almost lazily. Before Derek could react, James placed his hand flat against his chest. No wind-up, no power strike, just a touch. And Derek flew. He wasn't pushed, he wasn't thrown. His body launched backward as if hit by a wave of invisible force. His feet left the mat, and he crashed onto his back nearly 2 meters away. The sound of impact echoed through the gym. The room went silent. Derek lay staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving, his mind scrambling to process what had just happened. That's impossible," he croaked. Sarah couldn't breathe. In all her years of studying martial arts, she had never seen anything like it. Pure, clinical, devastating control. No rage, no waste, just mastery. James extended a hand. "It's not impossible. It's leverage, timing, and energy transfer. 22 years of practice." Derek ignored the hand and stumbled to his feet, legs trembling. 22 years. Doing what? Sarah's voice cracked as she held up her phone, displaying the search results. "He's not just a janitor. James Washington, Silent Storm, 5-time world MMA champion, retired undefeated after a 22-year career, after the death of his training partner." The words hit like a bomb. The students gasped. Derek's face drained of all color. He realized with crushing shame that he had mocked and challenged a living legend. I didn't know," Derek stammered. James' gaze didn't waver. "If you had known, would you have treated me with respect? Or would you still have humiliated another janitor? Another worker without the skills to defend themselves?" The question pierced deeper than any strike. Derek's arrogance crumbled. For the first time, his students saw him not as an unshakable instructor, but as a man confronted with his own ugliness. Sarah stepped forward. "Sensei, I've trained here 2 years out of respect for your skill. But tonight I didn't see teaching, I saw bullying." Other students nodded in agreement, their whispers filling the silence. Derek bowed his head. "James, Sarah, everyone, I'm sorry. Truly, I let arrogance blind me." James nodded. "Apology accepted." but words mean nothing unless your actions change. That night was the end of Derek's old reputation. Within weeks, half his students left. Sarah's secretly recorded video spread online, exposing the arrogant black belt humbled by a janitor. His name in the martial arts community was tarnished. But the gym itself transformed. James Washington was no longer just the man who cleaned the mats. Sarah convinced the owner to bring him on as an instructor, someone who could teach not just technique, but humility, philosophy, and respect. Months later, students gathered around him not to watch humiliation, but to learn from wisdom. Sarah once said after class, "Sensei James, thank you for proving that true strength doesn't need to roar. It speaks for itself." James only smiled. The greatest lesson? Never judge someone by what you see. Everyone carries a story that could change everything. Derek, now running classes in a smaller gym, carried his own story too. One of arrogance shattered, respect learned the hardest way, and the painful truth that sometimes the fiercest storm doesn't strike with fury, but with calm, unshakable strength.